Have you ever felt that someone took you for granted or didn't appreciate what you had to offer? In this video, we explore a fascinating concept inspired by the ideas of psychologist Carl Jung, how those who didn't initially value your presence may come to be obsessed with you. Discover how, according to Jung, deep psychological aspects like shadow and projection can influence how others perceive your true worth over time. Get ready to understand the power of your authenticity and how it can attract those who once underestimated you. The concept of the unconscious, central to Jung's psychological theory, posits that much of what influences our actions and emotions lies beneath the surface of consciousness. The unconscious houses repressed memories, unfulfilled desires, and aspects of our personality we prefer to ignore. Despite being out of sight, these invisible forces play a crucial role in our interpersonal relationships. When someone devalues or ignores you, it's often not a conscious or deliberate act. The unconscious is playing a significant role, guiding their behavior without them realizing it. In this context, Jung discussed projection, a psychological phenomenon where we attribute to others aspects of ourselves that we cannot accept. Thus, when someone undervalues you, they may be projecting onto you parts of themselves that they reject or find uncomfortable. This process of projection, once activated, can cloud their perception of you, making them see in you what they fear or reject in themselves. The unconscious is powerful because it acts without our awareness of its influence. Projection isn't limited to negative traits. It can also occur with positive characteristics. Sometimes we admire or become obsessed with people because we project onto them our unconscious desires or aspirations. In cases of devaluation, the rejection of you isn't necessarily due to something inherently wrong with you, but because, in some way, you reflect what they refuse to accept about themselves. What's even more fascinating is that the unconscious doesn't simply forget these projections. The energies repressed in the unconscious don't disappear. Instead, they accumulate and can manifest unpredictably. This is why people who initially seem indifferent or cold may, over time, develop an obsession with the very person they once devalued. This shift happens when the pressure of unconscious content becomes too strong and starts influencing their conscious thoughts. This process is not instantaneous. Often the person who undervalues you doesn't even realize they are developing these feelings. For them, it might seem like something that has suddenly arisen when, in reality, it's the result of a long accumulation of unresolved emotional tensions. At this point, internal mechanisms begin to change, and the initial rejection starts transforming into interest or even obsession. This transformation is a clear manifestation of the unconscious's power over our lives and relationships. One of Carl Jung's most notable contributions to psychology was his theory of the shadow. This concept describes those aspects of ourselves that we prefer to hide or ignore because they don't fit the image we want to have of ourselves. These repressed aspects form our shadow and reside in the unconscious. However, they don't disappear. In fact, they manifest in our interactions with others, particularly through projection. Projection is a mechanism by which we attribute to other people characteristics we cannot accept in ourselves. For example, a person who undervalues you might be projecting onto you traits from their own shadow. Perhaps they see in you qualities that are difficult for them to face in themselves, like insecurities, unfulfilled desires, or hidden fears. Instead of recognizing and confronting these internal feelings, their unconscious defends itself by transferring that emotional burden onto you. This has a devastating effect on relationships. Instead of seeing you as you are, they see you through the filter of their own shadow, distorting their perception and preventing them from valuing you genuinely. It's not that you've done something wrong or that there's something negative in your character. Rather, they are unknowingly grappling with an internal conflict they don't know how to resolve. As their shadow is projected onto you, the person who undervalues you creates a negative image of you in their mind. This image isn't real, but it seems so to them. They might not even be aware of why they reject or ignore you. They simply feel an unease they can't explain. This can lead them to distance themselves from you or fail to appreciate your qualities because they are trapped in an internal conflict that prevents them from seeing reality. What's interesting is that the more they project their shadow onto you, the more intense the unconscious connection between you becomes. Repressed emotions don't dissolve. They continue to fuel the psychic energy that eventually needs to be released. This is when things begin to change. What once was indifference or disdain turns into obsession as the unconscious, having held on to those repressed emotions, finally finds a way to manifest in consciousness. Jung believed that the shadow process is a fundamental part of individuation, the journey towards self-knowledge and the integration of all aspects of oneself. Therefore, when someone projects their shadow onto you and devalues you, they are fundamentally struggling with parts of themselves they have not learned to accept. This internal conflict is what can eventually lead them to develop an obsession, as their psyche tries to resolve the tension between the conscious self and the unconscious. In Jungian psychology, complexes, groups of emotions, memories, and perceptions centered around a significant or traumatic experience, act in the unconscious and, when activated, can dominate a person's behavior without them realizing it. In the context of relationships, complexes play a fundamental role as they can influence how a person perceives and treats others, even if that perception isn't based on reality. When someone undervalues you, they may be influenced by a complex activated in their unconscious. Perhaps they've had a painful experience related to rejection or lack of appreciation in the past, and seeing you reactivates that complex. Instead of responding rationally or based on the present, their behavior toward you is dictated by unresolved past emotions. What's fascinating is how complexes can change in form and intensity over time. Initially, the person may seem indifferent or even hostile, but as their complex is activated more and more, it begins to consume their thoughts and emotions. This marks the beginning of what Jung called emotional inversion. The emotional energy initially directed towards rejection or indifference starts to transform into something entirely different: obsession. Emotional inversion occurs when an unresolved complex becomes so powerful that it can no longer be ignored. The person who undervalues you finds themselves suddenly thinking about you constantly, craving your attention or approval. What was once an emotional disconnection turns into fixation, and this can be confusing for both them and you. What they don't understand is that the psychic energy they have been repressing, whether consciously or unconsciously, is seeking an outlet. This change can be rapid or gradual, but once it begins, it is difficult to stop. Emotional inversion is not something easily controlled because it comes from the depths of the unconscious. The person who once seemed uninterested in you suddenly cannot stop thinking about you, and what initially appeared as disinterest turns into a persistent obsession. For Jung, the key to deactivating these complexes lies in self-awareness. However, if the person remains unaware of what is happening in their psyche, the complex will continue exerting its influence, generating an endless cycle of obsession. In this way, emotional inversion can be both an opportunity for growth and a psychological trap, depending on how it is managed. Without the necessary introspection, the obsession may persist indefinitely, trapping the person in a loop of uncontrollable emotions. Carl Jung's theory of archetypes holds that we all share primordial images and universal patterns of behavior in our collective unconscious. These archetypes not only shape our individual psyche, but also influence how we relate to others. In the context of relationships, two archetypes play a crucial role: the lover and the pursuer. Both can emerge in relationships when someone who devalues you begins to develop an obsession. The lover archetype represents desire, passion, and deep connection. It can remain dormant in a person's psyche for a long time, especially if they fear vulnerability or rejection. When they become obsessed with you, it is possible that the lover archetype has been activated in their unconscious. This archetype drives them to seek an emotional or physical connection with you, despite initially ignoring or rejecting you. This happens because the emotions they had repressed or denied finally find an outlet through this archetype. The pursuer archetype, on the other hand, represents the relentless chase or quest for what is perceived as lost or unattainable. When someone who has undervalued you starts obsessing over you, it is likely that the pursuer has been activated. This obsession can be seen as a symbolic chase where you become the target of their unfulfilled desire. In this case, the initial act of devaluation might have created a sense of loss or regret, which then transforms into an intense pursuit to recapture you. These archetypes are powerful not only for what they represent, but also for how they act from the shadows of the unconscious. Once activated, They can deeply influence a person's behavior, making them act in ways even they do not understand. This is why someone who devalues you can suddenly change their attitude and become obsessive. It's not merely a change of opinion, but the activation of deep forces in their psyche, driving them to seek what they feel they have lost or now yearn for. Synchronicity, a concept developed by Carl Jung, refers to the meaningful coincidence of events that have no obvious causal relationship but are deeply connected in terms of meaning. In personal relationships, synchronicity can manifest when two people seemingly randomly begin to develop similar feelings or have shared experiences that appear beyond their conscious control. When someone who devalues you starts obsessing over you, it is possible that synchronicity is at play, linking the unconscious desires of both individuals. Imagine that for a long time someone ignored or underestimated you, but suddenly they begin to show interest. This transformation might seem illogical from the outside, but from a Jungian perspective, it could result from a synchronicity between your unconscious desires and theirs. Perhaps both of you were undergoing significant internal changes that resonated deeply at the unconscious level. Synchronicities tend to occur during moments of great personal transformation. As Jung noted, they can appear during phases of emotional growth, crises, or new beginnings. In this case, the change in attitude of the person who devalues you might coincide with a crucial moment in their life when their psyche is reorganizing its priorities and desires. Without knowing it consciously, they have included you in this process, and what was once indifference or disdain now turns into obsession. A person's unconscious might be projecting onto you the resolution of their own internal conflicts, and this is where synchronicity comes into play. Without either of you planning it, you have reached a point where your unconscious minds are in tune, seeking a resolution or closure for something that has been unresolved for a long time. This connection can be so powerful that it completely alters the dynamic of the relationship, causing the obsession to appear suddenly. Synchronicity is not something that can be easily explained in logical terms. It is a phenomenon that occurs when the psyche seeks to organize experiences and feelings that do not fit into a rational framework. Someone who devalues you and later becomes obsessed is experiencing an internal restructuring where unconscious energies align in ways that defy conscious expectations. Suddenly, you become the focus of their thoughts and emotions, not because something objectively changed between you, but because something within them changed profoundly. In Jung's theory, the concept of libido goes beyond the common meaning of sexual desire. For Jung, libido represents a more general psychic energy, the life force that drives not only sexual desire, but also creativity, motivation, and all areas of life. In the context of relationships, libido is the energy invested in a person or situation. When someone devalues you, it might seem like there is no libido investment in you. However, what happens beneath the surface is that this psychic energy is being repressed. The repression of libido does not mean it disappears. According to Jung, psychic energy that is not consciously expressed does not vanish, but accumulates in the unconscious. At some point, this energy needs to be released, and this is when a transformation of feelings can occur. A person who has devalued you might experience a reactivation of libido towards you, which manifests as a sudden and intense obsession. This phenomenon occurs because the psyche does not tolerate energetic imbalance. If someone has been repressing their true feelings for you, that energy will eventually find a way to surface. They may not understand why they suddenly cannot stop thinking about you, but what is happening is that the psychic libido, which had been ignored or blocked, is now being channeled toward you consciously. This process of libido activation can be both positive and negative. In some cases, it may lead to greater understanding and closeness, but in others, it can turn into uncontrollable obsession. The person may feel that their life is being dominated by these new feelings, and if they do not know how to handle them, they may fall into destructive patterns. This is where the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness, fundamental principles in Jungian psychology, comes into play. Managing libido is a delicate process. Instead of letting this energy accumulate and then explode in the form of obsession, Jung recommended the conscious integration of repressed emotions and desires. By doing so, one can prevent psychic energy from becoming something that destructively dominates a person's life. In the case of obsession, the activation of libido is a sign that something in the unconscious is seeking recognition and resolution. Transference is a central concept in both Freudian and Jungian psychology, although Jung developed it from a broader and deeper perspective. Transference occurs when a person projects their unconscious feelings, emotions, and desires onto another, usually as a repetition of emotional patterns from the past. In relationships, this phenomenon can explain why someone who initially devalues you later becomes obsessed with you. In the process of transference, unresolved emotions that a person has experienced in the past, perhaps in previous relationships or even in childhood, are projected onto you. This does not mean that you are the source of these feelings, but that you act as a mirror of their unresolved internal conflicts. In many cases, transference involves deeply repressed emotions, such as unrequited love, anger, or even fear of abandonment. The problem with transference is that it tends to distort reality. The person experiencing transference is not reacting to you as you are in the present, but to a mix of their memories, unresolved emotions, and unconscious desires. For this reason, someone who devalues you may suddenly develop an obsession with you because they are using transference as a mechanism to deal with past emotions that have not been processed. Jung observed that transference can be both destructive and constructive. If the person who devalues you is unaware of what is happening, transference can lead to uncontrolled obsession, where their emotions become increasingly tense and difficult to manage. However, if the transference is recognized and consciously worked through, it can be an opportunity for personal growth and the resolution of internal conflicts. In this context, transference is a rewriting of emotions. What was once indifference or rejection transforms into a need to connect with you, although this need is based on emotions and experiences from the past, not the present. For the person experiencing transference, this can be extremely confusing, as their feelings seem to have changed overnight. What they do not understand is that these emotions were always there, but remained hidden in their unconscious. The process of transference underscores the complexity of human relationships. When someone devalues you and then develops an obsession with you, what is happening is not simply a change of opinion, but a manifestation of unconscious processes that have been active for a long time. By recognizing and working with these processes, it is possible to unravel the true causes of the obsession and transform the relationship consciously. For Carl Jung, the process of individuation is one of the most fundamental concepts in his psychology. Individuation is the path toward integrating all aspects of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. It is the journey toward self-knowledge and personal wholeness. However, this process is not easy, as it involves facing the repressed parts of ourselves, many of which reside in the unconscious. When someone begins to obsess over you, it is likely that they are dealing with a crucial part of their individuation process. In many cases, you represent an aspect of their shadow or an unresolved part of their psyche that they need to integrate. Initially, this part of themselves manifests as rejection or devaluation because it is something they cannot accept. But as their individuation process progresses, those repressed emotions begin to surface and manifest as an obsession. The ego, which is the conscious part of the psyche, often resists this process. It does not want to confront the deep and often uncomfortable emotions emerging from the unconscious. But as the obsession grows, the ego is forced to deal with these emotions, which can generate an internal struggle between desire and rejection. This struggle can be extremely confusing for the person, as they do not understand why they are experiencing such intense feelings towards someone they previously did not value. The individuation process not only involves integrating the shadow, but also reconciling the ego with the unconscious. When the person who devalues you starts to obsess over you, they are trying to find a way to balance these two forces. The ego, which had been suppressing their true feelings, is now overwhelmed by the intensity of the unconscious emotions it cannot control. At this point, the obsession begins to take over. The journey of individuation is deeply personal, but also impacts relationships. The obsession they feel toward you is a sign that they are confronting a crucial part of their psychological development. If they do not integrate these emotions consciously, the obsession can persist, trapping them in a cycle of unresolved desire. However, if they work on their individuation process, they can reach a place of greater understanding and balance. Dreams in Jungian psychology are the language of the unconscious. Through them, the collective unconscious communicates with the conscious mind, bringing to the surface desires, fears, and conflicts that we cannot face directly in daily life. In the context of relationships, dreams can be a powerful source of information about the hidden feelings someone has toward you, especially if they have previously devalued you. When someone begins to obsess over you, it is very likely that their dreams are involved in this process. Dreams serve as a channel for the unconscious to express what cannot be expressed in the waking state. If that person has repressed their true feelings for you, these may manifest as vivid or repetitive dreams in which you play a central role. The collective unconscious, which Jung described as a repository of images and symbols shared by all humanity, also plays a crucial role in these dreams. Archetypes such as the lover or the hero may appear, activating feelings of desire or a need for connection that had been repressed. These archetypes are not merely personal, they belong to the universal human experience and, when activated, have a profound impact on the psyche. As the person dreams about you, their conscious mind starts being bombarded with images and emotions they cannot ignore. This can be the beginning of their obsession, as the dreams not only reflect their feelings but also intensify them. The more they dream of you, the stronger their unconscious connection to you becomes, and this starts to spill into their daily life. Jung believed that dreams are not merely random fantasies but important messages from the unconscious. In the case of obsession, dreams may signal an unresolved desire or a need for internal reconciliation. For the person who devalues you, dreams are a way for their unconscious to show them that they have feelings for you that they have not consciously recognized. According to Carl Jung, the cycle of desire is a continuous process that does not stop until repressed emotions are acknowledged and integrated into consciousness. When someone devalues you and then becomes obsessed with you, what is happening is a manifestation of the cycle of desire, where psychic energy has accumulated in the unconscious and now seeks release. Repressed desire does not disappear simply because it is ignored. Instead, it strengthens in the unconscious, accumulating energy until it manifests explosively. This is the case with obsession. The person who initially devalued you now finds themselves trapped in a cycle of thoughts and emotions they cannot control. Their desire for you has grown in intensity precisely because they ignored or repressed it for so long. This cycle can be extremely difficult to break. Every time they think of you, the desire is reinforced. Every time they try to distance themselves from those thoughts, the psychic energy intensifies, making them feel even more drawn to you. It is a vicious cycle where the more they resist the desire, the stronger it becomes. Jung described this phenomenon as a form of enantiodromia, a principle whereby something, when it reaches its extreme, turns into its opposite. The initial indifference turns into an obsession because the energy that was suppressed has now reached a point where it cannot be ignored. The psyche needs to find balance, and until that happens, the person will remain obsessed with you. Breaking the cycle of desire requires conscious effort. The person must face their repressed emotions and understand where their feelings come from. Only by integrating these emotions into their consciousness can they begin to free themselves from the obsession. However, this process is not easy, and many people remain trapped in the cycle of desire for long periods, unable to understand why they cannot stop thinking about someone they previously didn't care about. The cycle of desire is a testament to the power of the unconscious in our lives. What we do not acknowledge or confront consciously will eventually manifest in other ways, whether through obsession, dreams, or complexes. One of the most powerful concepts in Carl Jung's psychology is that of the shadow, a part of the unconscious that contains those aspects of ourselves we do not want to see or accept. The shadow represents all those repressed desires, feelings, and emotions that lie outside of our awareness, and while we may not perceive them directly, they deeply influence our actions, thoughts, and relationships. In the context of interpersonal relationships, especially those involving devaluation and subsequent obsession, the shadow plays a key role. Often, when someone devalues you, what is really happening is that they are projecting aspects of their own shadow onto you. For example, if a person feels insecure or fearful about certain traits in their personality, they may project those insecurities onto you, seeing you as less valuable in order to avoid confronting their own weaknesses. This unconscious defense mechanism allows them to divert their attention from their own issues and focus it on you. And what happens next is what Jung called the reversal of the shadow. The repressed energy in the unconscious does not disappear, it accumulates, and eventually what was projected onto you as devaluation transforms into obsession. In a way, you become the recipient of all those repressed emotions. This is an unconscious process, and often the person experiencing the obsession is not aware of what is happening. From their perspective, it feels as though a sudden shift has occurred in their psyche. The indifference they once felt toward you has been replaced by an overwhelming need for your attention or presence. Why does this change occur? Jung would explain that the shadow acts in a compensatory manner. If a person has been repressing an aspect of themselves for a long time, that repressed part begins to fight for recognition. In this case, by projecting their shadow onto you, the person is avoiding confronting their own internal conflicts. But since they cannot eliminate that energy from their psyche, the shadow starts to manifest in other ways, often in unexpected and uncontrollable forms. Thus, what was once unconscious rejection of you now becomes an obsession because their unconscious is trying to integrate what had previously been rejected. Obsession, in a sense, is a failed attempt to integrate the shadow. Instead of dealing directly with their own repressed feelings and emotions, the person seeks connection with you, believing that resolving their internal conflicts can be achieved through you. But in reality, what they need is not you, but a process of self-exploration and confrontation with their own shadow. Obsession is merely a manifestation of an unresolved internal struggle. Understanding the role of the shadow in romantic obsession helps us see that, in many cases, the obsession is not a direct reflection of the person experiencing it, but of their relationship with their own unconscious. What is projected onto you is not truly you, but the unrecognized aspects of the person who initially devalues you and eventually becomes obsessed. Archetypes are a fundamental part of Carl Jung's theory, universal patterns of behavior and emotion that exist within the collective unconscious shared by all humanity. Among the most relevant archetypes for interpersonal relationships, especially in the romantic sphere, are the Anima and animus. The Anima represents the feminine image in the male psyche, while the animus is the masculine image in the female psyche. Both archetypes play a crucial role in how individuals relate to the opposite gender and are often responsible for intense emotions of attraction, rejection, and ultimately obsession. When someone devalues you, it is possible that their anima or animus archetype is poorly integrated into their psyche. This means their internal relationship with the feminine or masculine is distorted or repressed. In many cases, the projections they cast onto you are deeply influenced by these archetypes. If someone has a conflicted relationship with their anima or animus, they may project that discord onto you. These archetypal images do not simply vanish. They remain hidden, and this is where obsession can begin to develop. Jung believed that when the anima or animus is not fully integrated, a person may unconsciously project their ideal partner onto someone in the external world. This projection can be extremely powerful. The person who once devalued you may now see you as the embodiment of their anima or animus. It is this projected image that drives their obsession. In other words, they are not truly seeing you as you are, but as the idealized image of their anima or animus. The relationship between the anima and animus is deeply personal and often tied to early experiences with figures of the opposite sex, such as parents. If a person had a complicated relationship with their mother or father, they might struggle to properly integrate their anima or animus into their psyche. This can lead to intense and contradictory patterns of attraction and rejection, culminating in obsession. In fact, many problems in romantic relationships are rooted in these unresolved archetypal projections. The intriguing aspect of this process is that, although it seems the person is obsessed with you, they are actually obsessed with a part of themselves that they see reflected in you. You become the channel through which they attempt to reconcile their internal relationship with their anima or animus. This is why obsession often appears irrational or disproportionate. The intensity of their emotions is not solely about you as an individual, but about the deep internal conflicts they are trying to resolve through you. The process of integrating the anima and animus is key in Jungian psychology for achieving a healthier and more balanced relationship with oneself and others. Until these archetypal projections are consciously recognized and worked through, the obsession is likely to persist. The person will continue to see you not as you are, but as a reflection of their own unresolved internal needs and desires. In Jungian psychology, the self is the central archetype of the totality of the psyche, the point of balance between the conscious and the unconscious. It is the ultimate goal of the individuation process, where a person integrates all aspects of themselves, including their shadow and their archetypes. In relationships, especially those involving devaluation and obsession, the self plays a fundamental role. It is often through others that we confront ourselves. When someone devalues you, it may be that they are in conflict with their own individuation process. The devaluation they project onto you could be a sign that they are projecting their insecurities or unintegrated parts of themselves. However, as the individuation process progresses, the unconscious begins to demand attention. This can manifest as an obsession with the person they once devalued, because that person now represents a mirror through which they can see and confront aspects of their self that they previously ignored. The self, in Jungian terms, is not something that is simply discovered. It is a continuous process of integration, and relationships with others are often a catalyst for this process. In the case of obsession, the person who devalues and then becomes obsessed with you is unknowingly using the relationship to move closer to their self. You become a symbol of something much greater, the journey towards wholeness. This type of obsession can be extremely intense because it is fueled not only by conscious desires, but by deep, unconscious needs. The person is not simply seeking your attention or affection, they are struggling with their own psyche, seeking resolution for internal tensions they cannot fully comprehend. They perceive you as a key figure in their psychological development, even if they are not aware of it. And it is important to understand that confrontation with the self through relationships is inevitable. We all project parts of ourselves onto others, and through these projections, we have the opportunity to integrate our psyche more fully. In the case of obsession, the intensity of the emotions experienced is a signal that the individuation process is occurring, albeit in a disordered and chaotic manner. If the person who devalues and then obsesses over you manages to recognize that what they are seeking is not just you, but a part of themselves, they have the opportunity to transform and develop a healthier relationship both with you and with their own psyche. Ultimately, the journey towards the self is a journey of acceptance and integration of all aspects of oneself, and relationships are a vital part of that process. Carl Jung's theories shed profound light on the hidden complexities within human relationships. By examining concepts like the unconscious mind, the shadow, complexes, and archetypes, we gain insight into how power dynamics, devaluation, and obsession aren't simply products of conscious interactions, but are driven by deep, unconscious forces. When someone who once devalued you begins to obsess over you, it isn't a surface-level change of heart. Rather, it's the expression of a psychological process where the unconscious has been at work from the beginning. Repressed emotions, unacknowledged desires, and shadow projections all play a part in these intricate dynamics. Grasping these forces not only helps us better understand our relationships, but also opens doors to deeper self-awareness. In the end, every human relationship reflects our inner conflicts, and only through self-exploration can we start to untangle the patterns that bind us in cycles of devaluation and obsession.